Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have the always amazing Heather Watson from Farm Management Canada. How are you, Heather?
I'm really, really good. Thanks, Tracy.
Excellent. So Heather is the Executive Director for Farm Management Canada, and we are going to be chatting about something really exciting. You guys have a huge milestone. You're celebrating 30 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So today I want to chat with you guys, Heather, you guys, about Farm Management Canada, about the 30 years, what's all happened, big accomplishments, and what the future holds. So in case you guys have never met Heather before, Heather, would you like to introduce yourself, what you do, and then talk a little bit about Farm Management Canada in case somebody doesn't know about your organization?
Sure. Yeah. So as Tracy lovely introduced me, my name's Heather, and I've been with Farm Management Canada since 2009. So I started as a project manager and then kind of quickly found myself leading a wonderful team in 2010. So it's been over a dozen years, which is saying something, almost half the life of the organization that I've been with it. And it's been a lot of fun. So Farm Management Canada is a national nonprofit organization, and we focus on increasing awareness, appreciation, and adoption of business practices on farms across Canada. We do that through, well, you'll hear a little bit more about that later, I'm sure, but we do that through various means. We have training and education programs, conferences, workshops, and we also do a little bit of research as well. So we kind of see ourselves as the umbrella for farm business management activities in Canada.
Excellent. Okay, so you probably answered it, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. So over 30 years ago, somebody said there is a need for this. Do you want to talk about that? Why did you guys launch Farm Management Canada?
For sure. So yeah, some of our audience members may remember the 80s, or at least have heard stories about the 80s beyond the big hair and the denim jeans. But really, when there's any fundamental change, it kind of is created out of chaos or out of a circumstance we didn't expect, and maybe we struggled through, and we thought, oh, is there a way we can do better next time, or we can handle this differently? So that's basically where we were created, out of this chaos of the 1980s, where we had interest rates soaring to upwards of 20%, and the commodity market just totally bottomed out. So it left a lot of farmers struggling, or even having to sell their farm. And so at the time, there were a few, farm business management folks around, and kind of, looking into, okay, well, how can we, better prepare farmers for the unexpected? And so our founder, Wilson Lurie, kind of tells the story best, and it involves a fire alarm and people stuck in a stairwell. But the gist of the story is there was a national meeting called with government and industry stakeholders. So this is shortly after the 80s, when they saw all the fallout. And they said, that was terrible for a lot of people. Is there something we can do to prevent it from happening again, or at least to kind of, wear a bit of a safety vest if a situation like this should arise again? And so they turned to farm business management, and they said, well, farm business management is a way you can kind of look at what might happen, how your business might respond, how you might respond, and kind of put mechanisms in place to, to stay on the chosen path, but also, to know which detour lanes make most sense for you along the way, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so they thought, we need to do this, and we need to do this in a big way. So basically they said, well, let's start a national nonprofit, non-government organization. So neutral, unbiased, that's just all about supporting farm business management in Canada. And that's where we came from, originally called the Canadian Farm Business Management Council. Today we're called Farm Management Canada. We changed our name at our 20th anniversary in 2012 to something a little bit easier to say, rolls off the tongue a bit easier. And so we were formed in 1992. So that makes 2022 our 30th anniversary.
Wow, exciting. Yes, I can imagine why this organization was formed in the 80s or after the 80s, because wow. Yes, let's hope we never see any of that again, right? The crazy interest rates, all of that.
Well, and that's kind of what we what we're looking around today, and we're seeing, okay, inflation rates are at an all-time high. And so we're thinking, is history repeating itself? Are we in a better position than we were before? And can we use this, this sense of the world is different than it ever has been? Is that a way we can kind of spur more business management activities as well? You don't want to wait for something bad to happen, but oftentimes that's kind of the trigger event that leads to change. So we'll see.
It's funny, as I was saying that, I'm like, Tracy, we're seeing it right now. I mean, not to that extent. And I mean, that would be devastating, but we'll go all financial here, which we are, but even the small jumps in interest rate and the inflation right now is having a massive impact. So another reason I'm happy to have you guys on here, because it's great continued exposure as we chat about the anniversary and celebrate. So excellent. Thank you for sharing your origin story. So why don't we talk about 30 years? That is a long time. Do you want to talk about the evolution and what you guys have done, kind of high level? I know you guys are busy and always doing a lot of stuff, but do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll give kind of like a general overview, and then maybe talk about some of our highlights, or maybe my highlights, because it's probably very biased from my point of view. But looking back, has been actually really fun. So, looking back at all of our annual reports and seeing what did we focus on and what did we talk about, and kind of what programs came along the way. It's been really cool. And we actually, rather than just oh, that's interesting, we actually created a little spot on our Farm Management Canada website where we've included a timeline of not just our history, but it goes back just kind of a few years before that to when things were starting to percolate. And so you kind of start to see almost the history of the development of farm business management programming and training and mandates in Canada. So that's kind of cool. And then we also went back and did a bit of a history document. So, what has the organization looked like from inception to now? And, it's just really interesting to see the evolution and to understand the context of that. Because when we started, for example, to be a truly national organization, we had one representative from every provincial territorial ministry on the board, as well as one producer representative from all of the general farm organizations across the provinces and territories too. And then, of course, a few national representatives and things like that. And, that was in the days when, funding looked really different. Core funding looks really different. And so you can kind of see and follow along with, some policies and things like that, that were happening in the sector, and, different financial statuses and things that, that all had to change in terms of affordability of doing that. But it's cool because we still maintain those national connections, just in a different way. So yeah, it's pretty cool to look back at it. And I kind of think like, it's funny because I'm working on this other research study right now that looks at, kind of best practices in farm business management training and encouragement and everything like that around the world through our network that we have with various fellow farm management enthusiasts is what I call them. And, something that we're seeing there is I feel like, if you can think of it, I feel like we've done it. Not to say that there's not a lot more to come because, training and education involves with your audience and with who you're trying to reach and how you're trying to reach them. But it's kind of cool. Like, you name it, we've done it, and we keep doing it or finding different ways or new ways of doing it, because farm business management doesn't change extraordinarily. Your business plan has some of the same concepts. Sure, they change over time a little bit in terms of what you emphasize for various audiences, but it's trying to keep it fresh and exciting and something that people are interested in doing and they see the value in doing. So like, for example, in our inception year was the first national conference to showcase all that was farm business management across Canada. So all the resources and things like that. And you see that continue today. We have our national resources showcase at our national conference. And then we also had things like we had a regular radio program. We had a magazine. We've had a mentorship program, countless workshops. We were the first to kind of combine workshops and kind of online, or I guess seminars and online, and created the Agri webinar program. And it's funny when you look back, because now it's just like boop, Zoom, boop, Teams. But back in the day, it was like finding, these, programmers for like languages we didn't understand on the computer or whatever, and saying, can you create a program that people can, watch through this new thing called the internet?
Yes, I know.
It's kind of cool. Like when you look back and you're like, we were, we've always kind of had our mind towards how can we use the new technology to bring in farm business management? And so to see examples of that, and before I was at the organization, for sure, my predecessors had some pretty creative minds on, like, before the internet was widely used, we also had like these, I wish I could remember the name off the top of my head, but these like phone hubs, and it was like a modem connected to a phone, and you could phone into kind of a farm business management expert, and it would connect you with the closest person locally to save you on like, your dial-up costs or whatever it was. And you'd be able to like talk to someone and be like, hey, so I'm thinking of doing this. How about this? Way back when we had extension from the provinces and things. But it's like, we were there setting up those networks. How cool is that? And now today, of course, it looks totally different with, online and virtual, but we're still, connecting people, connecting ideas, and bringing together diverse perspectives to try and, see what's possible when you bring together someone with financial expertise and someone with human behavior expertise, and how do we make a difference? Yeah.
Interesting.
Really cool.
It's so funny you say nothing has changed. And in one breath, you're right, because business and the core of business doesn't change, and the core of farming doesn't change. But on the other hand, as you were saying, like the technology stuff, you had me looking back to when I launched Farm Marketer, and I remember reaching out to people and they're like, oh, we're not on the internet yet. And when I first started our media company, sort of jump in here with my story, but it's so funny, we forget this.
Yeah.
Reaching out to people and they're like, oh no, we don't do the internet yet. We don't advertise. We don't put content on there. Like, I was innovative back then, end of the time. And I've already totally forgot about that. And just like the fundamentals you're delivering, you guys have done some innovative stuff, right?
Yeah. And we're always learning. Like, that's the thing. I guess it's kind of, you want to practice what you preach, right? So like when I came into the organization, I had a steep learning curve as like, so, I knew about communications, about working with writers and about making great content, but I had to learn, how do you do a business plan and do it well? And what does it mean to have, team engagement and trust? And so going through the actual like reality of running a nonprofit like a business, as it were, which of course we have to and we should. But I think that's where I really, look at farming and I say, oh man, like there's so much opportunity by putting some, very basic pieces in place just to make your life easier. There's a policy in place before an incident comes up, or, there's a plan in place with contingencies in case an opportunity or a risk present themselves. Like having kind of lived and breathed that, school of hard knocks, all that, which I think is important from growth and experience. But then coming out the other side and being like, wow, like I couldn't have done that on a wing and a prayer. So it comes from a very genuine place for sure. But yeah, and then it's funny. I mean, you kind of do what feels right and what makes sense. And that's I think what we've been doing all along. We're like, well, that's working, but it could be better and it could be better. And then before you know it, you're thinking, well, we're at the head of the pack here. Like we're leading something really cool. And I think that really shines when we have the opportunity to speak with, others that are doing what we do around the world at things like the International Farm Management Association Congress, where it's like, okay, here's what we're working on. And then we're like, oh, what are you guys working on over in Scandinavia? Or what are you guys working on over in Tasmania? And all of a sudden it's just like ideas feeding and beg borrowing and stealing. And we're all getting better for it. So
fantastic. Awesome. Okay, well, then that is a natural segue to highlights, accomplishments. Do you want to touch on some of your favorites or things you want to point out?
Yeah, I think it's so hard to pick your favorites, right?
How do you, right?
Picking your favorite child.
I was just going to say, you stole my words. It's like, you really shouldn't.
Yeah. But I guess, yeah, for me, it's those things that tend to have a lasting impression because we've kind of, and, maybe I was the last to the table on this, but I think there's a real fundamental difference between, informational or informative learning and transformational. Yeah. And so I think we've made a huge swing in that way. Like, I mean, there's a balance, right? Because some folks, it's good to be like, hey, did you know this? Or, hey, remember when we talked about this? You still want to meet people where they are, but then those that are like, yeah, I heard that. Yeah, I'm doing it. It's like, well, what's next? And so I think it's cool that we've been able to take things like, like classic workshops and then really build them into something more transformational in terms of, okay, how about, so for example, we have our Bridging the Gap workshop and it's for farm families with transition. And so we started that back in 2016 and we had funding to do it for 2 years. So not a huge lifespan. But basically part of the program was bringing farm families together to learn together and to actually have those conversations in real time. And we got a lot of comments from people saying this is the first time we've actually gone to an event together. Like usually, one person goes and it's like, oh, how was it? I was back here working. And there can be even some negative sentiment around that. But it was having, the generations on the farm in the room, learning together and kind of opening up that space for perspective. So, okay, well, I have a fear of commitment because I don't know XYZ. Okay, well, I have a fear of, whatever, because I don't know. And it was, there's so many assumptions that we put on ourselves and each other's that it was a real like clearing space. And so it was fantastic. And I'm glad that we're able to bring back some of that in the coming year. But the other part of that program was what we called kind of a successor development program, because we're looking around and saying, well, what opportunity does the next generation have to come in together, connect about transition specifically? And we said, and how exposed are they to the fundamentals of business management? So we brought the group of them to our conference, the Ag Excellence Conference, which is all farm business management all the time. And then also to things like Outstanding Young Farmers Conference and the Canadian Young Farmers Forum, all with a focus on how can we do better, in terms of managing our businesses. And then with that group, like they formed such a close bond. We still have a Facebook group and still talk to each other. And that was back in 2016, which is crazy to think about. So much time has gone by. But like just, that connection was established, and some really amazing things happened and continue to happen because we were able to go that level deeper. So I think that's what I'm really proud of, is those fundamental changes. It may seem like such a small thing, but even something like, we've been able to connect with a lot of academic institutions and start talking about, how is this content being taught and what's the response from students, and layering in some more engaging pieces, for example. So it's like they see where this comes into play when they're back home on the farm or out in kind of the real world. And then, just the staying power of some of our activities. So our national conference, for example, our network tends to get, bigger and bigger as we find a new farm business management enthusiast. It's like, yoink, you're coming with us. Can we get you to speak at our conference? I'm sure you're the same, Tracy. It's kind of like, you're on the hunt for who has.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's bring them to Canada. Let's kind of squeeze their brains and just get everything we can out of it. And so that's been really fun to build that network, not only across Canada, but like internationally as well. It makes my job easier when I can pick up the phone and say, so how are things looking in Scotland? And, would you be doing anything differently? Or what do you think of this idea, etc. So it's been really neat. And I think, like, one of my fundamental values, and I think that echoes into the organization, is just trying to leverage resources, trying not to duplicate what others are doing. So, being very careful about not stepping on toes just to kind of like seize an opportunity. But it's like, is that really what the sector needs right now? Is there something that's, is there a need that's not being met that we can support? So I think that's where I kind of look at our risk management program. And it kind of started funny because it started when my colleague Matthew and I went to a risk management forum, and it was like 3 days of let's talk about insurance programs. And we were like, what? Like, risk management is about so much more than that. So we said, we're going to make a list of all the risks that producers face and see if there's any way we can kind of create like a framework or a taxonomy so we kind of understand what's happening and how they're related to each other. And we came out with probably like the most boring book you'll ever read, but it was like a fundamental step to be like, okay, like, we can see this for what it is now. We can see the bigger picture. And then that allowed us to, again, look at, okay, but farmers aren't going to use this. Like, what can we create that's active, engaging, timely? And so that led to our AgriShield online platform, where it's like, you can complete it, whenever you're free or available. It's going to live online. If you have an advisor, they can come in and they can help you with it, etc. So just like things like that, and just how this kind of fundamental basic piece kind of morphs into an entire program is really, really cool. And then the fact that in the last few years, we've been able to, really expand beyond just, business skills to leadership, mental health, and some of those other softer areas, because, we knew about it and we were aware of it all along, but we just, we didn't go there in a specific way. And now it's like, you see how management and leadership are two sides of the same coin, and you can speak to that. And it's like, oh, do you want support with management? Here's a bunch of programs and resources. Leadership, here's a bunch of programs and resources, etc. So yeah, I think it's kind of that slow and steady building of kind of this center of knowledge. And it's like, whatever you might have a question about, chances are there's something out there that exists and we can connect you with it. So I think that's a really good feeling. And the fact that there's always going to be different ways of doing things, right? And especially as we look at the unique needs of different demographics. So like right now we're getting ready to publish the results of our farm women study. And so knowing their unique, needs and preferences is going to open up a whole new world for us again. So it's just, seeking out the information to understand what's working, what's not, and who's being served and who's not. And I think that'll keep us very busy for a long time.
Well, and you know what? Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're all evolving. Mm-hmm. We're all adapting and we're all responding to where the world's at, where people are at, where evolution's at. You can't really, and I'm going to ask you about the next 2, 5, 10 years. But to me, when I was thinking of asking you that, that's hard because really we need to be adapting to where we're at right now to try and I would say maybe back in the past, it might have been a little easier, maybe not, but you guys are always just responding to where the industry's at and where you need to support and maybe where you want to lead them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. It's funny because, when I think of where we want to see ourselves, like my immediate thought went to what would really help us, like, because sometimes I feel like we're restrained a little bit because, we don't have all the money in the world. But that's only one piece of it. The other piece is, there's still a vast majority, I would say, within the ag sector that don't see the value of investing in farm business management practices. And so like I was thinking, what would we like to see, years down the road? And I went to kind of our vision statement, which is kind of an ag sector that prioritizes farm business management. You could extend that to farm business excellence because it's not just about I'm doing these practices and, going by the book. It's like, it has to work for you. You have to see value in it and you have to, kind of acknowledge that. So like we would love to see, I think it would make our job a heck of a lot easier if we could, get more recognition for the value and kind of the untapped potential of treating the farm like a business, bringing those business practices onto the farm, trying to get ahead of the impending wave when, the next goodness knows what comes, right? The next COVID or the next inflation rates, or it's all about, not having a crystal ball, but, taking a look at what could happen, how could I respond most effectively, and how do I know when to kind of, go down that path versus that path. So, but again, I mean, farming is incredibly, I want to say difficult, but I don't want it to be negative. It's incredibly intense. There's so much going on. There's so many balls in the air. There's so much that you have to look after. And, it's much easier to see the results of your behavior or your decision-making in the field, in the barn. You're like, yeah, that was the right, seed variety. Yeah, those were the right genetics. But business management is a bit more of a long game. And sometimes I think because we don't see perhaps the immediate gratification, it tends to take the this sidebar or the back burner.
Yeah.
But it'd be really cool if we could, find a way to integrate these business practices into everyday farm life a little bit more seamlessly. I think that would move the needle in a big way.
Well, and not to be negative, but there's that fine line of negative and realistic, but also when inflation creeps up, when interest rates creep up, when times get a little tougher and things get a little tighter, we tend to get the pencil out a little more often and sharpen it up, right? So that's kind of the double-edged sword when, right? And again, totally. On the head, farmers are busy. And I see it too. I see it in my husband, the farmer, where he would prefer to put his attentions time-wise and just natural interests, right? It's a hard one. It's a very hard one. Farm business management is so critical but it's challenging. I mean, it's challenging for any business owner. I own
for sure.
company, right? So we can't just say farmers. At the end of the day, when you're running a business, you're wearing 10, 12 different caps, right? So it's like, okay, I need to sell for me to get money coming in. So the farmers, they need to make sure the crops are good, the animals are good. And then some of the other activities take a back seat, right?
Yeah.
They're exhausted at the end of the day. So I see where you're coming from. And on the flip side, that's such a positive because there's so much room for farmers to sharpen the pencil, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Not just financial, but like the risk management. I mean, that stuff is probably going to come up a lot now, right? With some of the stuff that's unfortunately coming down the pipeline, I think, right? Anyways, back to you.
No, exactly. Tracy, like you're right on. I couldn't have said it better myself. That's a great observation. And I mean, like, it's not, I'm not here to do like the finger wagging or, it's businesses everywhere. I mean, especially farming, just because it is so intense. That's the word I was looking for earlier. It's so intense and diverse. And like you say, you're doing a million things at once. And even like, myself, like, would I rather just be, getting on with like, okay, let's talk to this partner. Let's get this training program going. Of course. But then it's when something happens that you're like, oh, I should have planned that better. Yeah. I could have planned that better. Or, even when it comes down to like, some of the mental health research we've done is that feeling of uncertainty, and not just as the manager, but as everyone involved in the business is like, okay, we're going to follow you. We're not really sure where you're going. And that can create a lot of stress that kind of trickles down too, especially when all of a sudden you've got, whatever, 8% interest or whatever it is these days. And you're like, are we going to be okay? Has anyone crunched these numbers?
Yes.
And certainty brings that, it might be a reality. Like it might be like, holy cow, we're going to go through a bit of a rough patch here, but knowing is better than not knowing. At least you know how it's going to look on the other side to some degree when you're following these practices. So,
amen. Okay, so we covered some of the highlights. We kind of jumped ahead to going forward to 5-10 years. I don't know if you want to add on that, but the next place that I want to go with the conversation, if you've covered what you want to share for the future, would be really this year and a little more immediate. What's going on with you guys right now? What do you hope to see this year, next year? Right now, let's talk about that. Because I was listening to some positive motivational stuff and they said the present is all we have. Right? You can't regret and worry about the past. This was what I was listening to this morning. You can't focus back there and rake yourself through the coals for the mistakes and what you didn't do. And if you look to the future, which is unknown, you're just going to worry. So you got to focus on the present. There's my Buddha.
I love it. I remember listening to, what is he called? .com at a conference. I think he's out of Toronto. But yeah, I forget what he called it, but it was like premeditated worry or something like that, where it was like, it's funny. I talk to people about it all the time. So it's like, that's the thing that kind of stirs up the butterflies in our tummy is like, oh, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? But I mean, like, what an anxious way to live. Like, you're absolutely right. Like, what do I know right now? What do I need to know to kind of like settle my uncertainty about the future? And can I do anything about it? And chances are there's a little bit you can do about it. But, being able to kind of let go if it is out of your hands. So for example, and I'm glad kind of the conversation has kind of gone from like where we want to go and then the kind of where we are today, because like something that's going to impact the future of, agriculture in Canada, I think, fundamentally is going to be the next policy framework. And that's going to be, it's the next 5-year block. 5 years isn't a long time, but you can get a lot done in 5 years for sure. But, we're not sure what that's going to look like at this point. And that's a pretty fundamental piece of programming for our organization where, they've been with us for 30 years. And so we're hoping that they'll continue to be by our side going forward. But are things going to look a bit different? Are they going to ask for, different things, different emphasis, probably a lot more on kind of climate action? Well, now we're thinking all of a sudden, okay, well, what linkage does that have to business practices? Certainly the bottom line for sure. But what about all the other areas, marketing, transition, people, what's kind of the impact on that? So it's interesting, looking forward, of course, you're like, okay, so where are we today and what can we do? But so of course we're in conversation with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to see if there's ways that we can ensure the program administration helps to support our capacity to reach, mutual goals with our producers and with our government and everyone else in between. So we look forward to see what happens there. Probably a few months until we find out. But in terms of immediate, we're at the end of this contribution agreement. This is the last year for both of the programs that we're in. And so we're, just pushing hard to do as much as we can in the time that we have left. We've had 4 great years of awesome programming and evolving programming. So we're looking forward to, we started our farm financial fluency workshops with MNP last year. We'll continue those this year. And again, who knows what the future holds? Hopefully we can continue them. And we already have the advanced sessions sketched out. So hopefully we can get the support for that. We'll continue with our risk management training this fall as well. And of course, we're all looking forward to the Agricultural Excellence Conference. That, the first one was back in 1992 to say what's happening across Canada, and bring in the experts that we need to kind of keep us going, keep us excited, but thinking of business management in different ways. So the AgX conference is in Canmore, Alberta. So after 2 years hiatus and going virtual, we're going to push for an in-person event. We have a hybrid component. It's nice to be able, now that we've connected with everyone online, it's nice to be able to keep that audience and make sure we can connect as many people as possible to the content we're sharing. So that's at the end of November, the 22nd to the 24th. And then we're also bringing back the workshop I mentioned before, the Bridging the Gap Farm Transition Workshop. We're going to work with AFSC in Alberta to bring that back, at least for this year. And we're also working on launching a new grain marketing workshop too. So that's really exciting. In January, we'll be welcoming a brand new cohort to our National Farm Leadership Program. And then we've also got our Insight mini program and our alumni program, NFLP2, happening as well. So it's, again, we're kind of, you start with something, see if it works, see if it's good, and then branch out. So we're excited about that. And then I already mentioned the really cool project that we're doing, kind of looking at internationally, are there things we can do better to support our farmers here in Canada? Us as in, everyone out there, you, me, lending institutions, provincial governments, whomever, just are there some secrets to success that we haven't uncovered yet through our networks? So making a really concerted effort, and especially in light of, okay, hopefully we can start saying we're post-COVID at some point, but, certainly after the ringer we've all been through, does that mean we need to change things going forward? Or is it going back to the way things were before? I don't know yet, but it'll be interesting to see what they're doing around the world and if they've discovered any recipes for success that we can bring back here. And I was going to come up with a cool metaphor, but I can't. So you have to help me, Tracy. Bake the best management cake ever. No, I don't know.
Well, there you go. I can't think that quick. I'll think on it, and I'll let you know for our next episode together.
Perfect.
I'm hoping you're coming on. We had chatted about this briefly before the AgX event, and then we'll talk a little bit about the event and some of the speakers, and we'll promote that event closer to that time. So
yeah,
I'll try and come up with a good one for you by then. That gives me some time.
All right. That'll be the title. That's our homework.
Oh, there you go. Nice. So, okay, that's excellent. Every time you talk about everything that you're up to, I'm like, gosh, does this girl ever sleep? I know I'm busy, but I sit there, I'm like, oh my gosh, Heather, I'm tired listening to you.
Well, I do have a whole team behind me, so I cannot take the credit. I've got a really wonderful team, and it's funny. One of our colleagues, Christy, celebrated 15 years at our organization a couple of days ago, and I was like, that's half the life of our whole organization. That's so cool. And yeah, it's so nice to have people around you for so long. You can almost finish each other's sentences, but yeah, we're really lucky.
Excellent. Okay. So I think we covered all the good stuff. Congrats on 30 years.
Thank you.
Amazing. Congrats to you and your team. Let them know that we pass along our congrats as well.
Oh,
that's coming up. When did you say is the actual 30th?
So the actual 30th is November 12th, 2022. But our kind of celebration will be in conjunction with the AgX conference in Canmore, because it's pretty close to the date. So we'll be reaching out for some, videos and testimonials from folks we've worked with or hopefully impacted positively over the last few years. I'm sure there's lots. And as well, we're starting to kind of put some of our historical information and kind of highlights and accomplishments in our social media channels. And then as well, I mentioned on our website, there's a little, 30th block you can click and you can see timeline of accomplishments, as well as our history, and then access some of the media that we've created to kind of promote not just ourselves, but the evolution of farm business management and the benefits of farm business management practices. So encourage you to check it out.
I think you guys have a few different websites with your different content. Do you want to share those right now in case somebody wants to check them out?
Oh gosh, yeah, we have too many websites, I'm sure, but it just always feels like these names need to be catchy, and you need to So we've got our kind of organizational website is fmc-gac.com. That's a pretty easy one. And then we have our National Farm Business Management Resource Center. And so in that one, it's got links to, training programs available, events, resources, tools, anything we've come across, as well as some of our own kind of toolkits and other websites. But if you go to takeanewapproach.ca, you can kind of link to all the other stuff out there. Like we've got a farm transition toolkit at farmtransitionguide.ca. Not that I expect you to remember all this. We've got like a cool financial statements management program at farmfinancials.ca. And I already mentioned myagrishield.ca. So, but through Take a New Approach, you'll be able to find all the other bits and pieces that we do.
Okay. I'll put those two main ones into the show notes. And then from there, they can navigate and find what interests them. That's a good way to funnel it too, right? They can kind of see the whole big picture.
Exactly.
And go, here's my interest, and then kind of chase that rabbit down the trail, right?
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
There's an analogy for you.
Yeah, I like it. You came around in the end, Tracy. I knew you could do it.
You chase that farm management rabbit down that trail, Heather.
Oh, I will.
Oh, shoot. I will too.
That's why I'm so tired, probably.
We're back into a new season of the show, so I'll be chasing a few rabbits down the trail right away.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so fun to chat with you, Heather. I always enjoy our conversation. So we shared that all, and we're going to have you back on, and I'm going to talk with you right away off camera and see how we can work together to promote some of those things coming up. So thank you, Heather, and you in the audience. Thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned next week and all the future episodes for more of Heather, Farm Management Canada, and great impact farming episodes. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.